This dashboard shows Pakistan's macroeconomic indicators in mid-2026. The headline numbers project stability. Public debt to GDP dropped to 68.5%. The fiscal deficit hit a two-decade low, leaving a primary surplus of 3.2%. Look closer at how those numbers were achieved, and the diagnosis changes. Tax revenues missed their targets twice in a single fiscal year. The primary surplus relied heavily on central bank profit transfers, not structural tax-based growth. This cycle of short-term stabilization leading to severe balance of payments crises has now resulted in 25 separate IMF arrangements since 1950. Pakistan does not lack financing. The institutional arrangements guarantee capital keeps flowing. It also does not lack technical knowledge. The domestic IT workforce is highly competitive globally. The actual constraint is structural. It is a discretion problem. The authority to tax, to price energy, and to allocate credit is held by the precise networks positioned to benefit from those decisions going their way. The system functions as a rent extraction equilibrium. This equilibrium enforces a strict ceiling on the economy. By rewarding low-complexity exports, like raw textiles, it forecloses the sophisticated capabilities required to move into electronics or machinery. The resulting lack of foreign exchange leaves the state unable to fund human capital or energy infrastructure. Solving this crisis does not mean begging those entrenched networks to dismantle their own privileges. It requires engineering new institutional architectures that physically and legally bypass those domestic gatekeepers entirely. This diagram maps the mechanism of the capability trap inside Pakistan's formal economy. In a single year, tax exemptions granted to politically connected sectors siphoned 4.61% of GDP out of the system. That missing revenue is larger than the entire primary surplus the government currently boasts about. To keep the state running, the government forces the remaining compliant formal sectors to absorb the cost through aggressive indirect taxation. The compliance burden becomes lethal. To survive, businesses and labor migrate away from the friction, swelling the informal sector until it absorbs over 70% of the non-agricultural workforce. As the formal tax base narrows even further, the state starves. It loses the exact capital required to build a reliable grid and educate a competitive workforce. The energy sector runs on the exact same loop. Government departments default on their own bills, while politically protected consumer tariffs remain intact, accumulating a 5.2 trillion rupee circular debt. As long as revenue collection relies on human discretion, the connected elite will write exemptions for themselves. Broad-based fiscal targets will remain mathematically impossible. The standard policy advice inside Pakistan is to abandon complex reform and simply replicate the mass manufacturing textile boom of Bangladesh. This graph plots Bangladesh's surging export volume against its underlying state capacity. Despite decades of RMG export growth, Bangladesh maintains a severely weak tax-to-GDP ratio of just 6.8%. Pakistan, constrained as it is, currently taxes its economy at 10.6%. Bangladesh's state is objectively weaker at capturing domestic revenue. Furthermore, roughly 70% of Bangladesh's global exports rely on least developed country trade preferences. Those preferences expire in 2026. High export volume does not equal state capacity. Sectoral growth built over a hollowed-out tax base inevitably hits a wall of debt and external fragility. Before any new export strategy can function, a non-negotiable safeguard must exist at the macroeconomic level: absolute central bank independence. Turkey spent decades building a highly diversified, sophisticated manufacturing base. Then, the executive branch applied extreme political pressure on monetary policy, insisting that low interest rates would cure inflation. This chart tracks the immediate fallout. Inflation spiked past 85% in 2022, and the Turkish lira lost over 80% of its value against the dollar. The mechanism driving this collapse was entirely political. Every time a central bank governor attempted to correct the policy with rate hikes, they were fired, annihilating the institution's credibility. Pakistan already flirts with this exact boundary erosion. In 2025, military intelligence engaged directly with foreign exchange dealers over rupee depreciation, a core central bank function. No structural reform or capability upgrade can survive if monetary policy is hijacked for short-term political convenience. History proves that broad tax exemption reviews fail in Pakistan because they require the very people holding the discretion to vote it away. The highest leverage solution is production point digital monitoring. It bypasses the negotiation phase entirely. This diagram shows the required shift in architecture. The state removes the human tax collector and their discretionary enforcement slider, replacing them with a locked digital node. The system taxes output at the exact moment it rolls off the production line. Already running in Pakistan's cement and sugar sectors, this method physically eliminates the taxpayer's ability to underreport. You do not build a tax base by pleading with entrenched elites to comply. You engineer systems where non-compliance is structurally impossible. This quadrant chart models how nations actually escape the capability trap. Vietnam and Malaysia generated rapid industrial upgrading, but they did not do it by aggressively dismantling their domestic elite networks. They built special economic zones governed by distinct, insulated rules. These enclaves operated independently from domestic political interference, allowing foreign direct investment to import advanced capabilities directly into the physical supply chain. Compare that to Pakistan's incumbent textile sector. It remains highly protected by domestic politics, exposed to constant policy friction, and has flatlined in global market share for 10 years. The proof of this bypass concept already exists inside Pakistan. The IT and freelance sector operates on a 0.25% fixed tax regime, structurally separated from the state's traditional discretionary friction. Left alone by domestic gatekeepers, Pakistan's IT sector export earnings grew at 5 times the rate of the heavily entrenched textile sector. The blueprint is clear. Replicating the IT sector's low-friction, zero-discretion conditions into physical manufacturing zones is the only viable path to economic complexity. Pakistan's capability trap is solved by a discipline of attention. You stop trying to reform a center that has proven unreformable. This map visualizes the necessary result, a dual-track state. You leave the burdened, rent-seeking economy as it is, and you aggressively construct a new, legally insulated economy parallel to it. This rests on 3 pillars: automated production point tax collection to fund the state without negotiation, a fiercely independent central bank to protect the currency, and legally walled special economic zones to incubate complex manufacturing. The state currently holds narrow geopolitical capital through CPEC infrastructure and Gulf investment. That capital must be spent entirely on building and legally defending these enclaves. The critical discipline is recognizing the difference between a real cure and a cyclical pause. A short-term IMF stabilization or a spike in low-value exports is not an economic victory. The math is absolute. If you cannot dismantle the rent extraction equilibrium, you must build an economy where its discretion cannot reach.